Hey guys, welcome back to Games of War. Today's episode we're going to talk about a couple of my favorite long forgotten Sega Saturn games. Sit back, relax, and hope you guys enjoy. I'd like to start off by talking about Mr. Bones on the Sega Saturn. Now this is one of my personal favorite games on the system. It was released in the fall of 1996. Now before this game came out, there was a considerable pre-hype buzz for it. Critics were talking about it, gamers were talking about it. Unfortunately, it was released and then faded into obscurity rather quickly. Now the plot of this game is pretty out there. There's an evil scientist named Dagulian, and he has found a way to use alchemy and science to create a magic drum kit. Now this drum kit will provide life for the dead. Now it is through this creation that he has created a skeletal undead army. Unfortunately for Dagulian, there is one good soul amongst his army, and that is Mr. Bones. Dagulian quickly realizes this, turns his army against Mr. Bones, and is out to finish him and take over the world using evil. Before the game came out and I was looking in my magazines to see just what kind of game Mr. Bones was, to try and make a sound decision on whether or not I wanted to purchase the game. From the pictures and from what I had read, it led me to believe that this would be kind of a 2D action adventure platformer, and that's the kind of thing I was expecting, and it looked pretty good for what it was. I purchased the game, brought it home, and the first couple levels kind of tricked me into thinking that it was just a nice, atmospheric 2D platformer. The game looks very good on the Sega Saturn. It's got a horror theme running throughout. Mr. Bones is a skeleton. A lot of levels take place in like a graveyard or levels that are dark and cloudy and kind of supernatural enemies, bats and ghosts and things of that nature. But by the third level, I noticed that this game was anything but ordinary. Now, the opening level, you kind of begin with Mr. Bones, kind of like an endless runner type level, where the level's constantly scrolling and you're running around, jumping over gravestones, trying to avoid enemies, make your way through the level. The second level began, and it was, as is, like a standard platformer. You're jumping, you're flipping switches, you're moving gravestones, finding secret passageways, flipping switches, getting keys, opening up passageways, fighting enemies. Mr. Bones has kind of a lightning attack out of his hands. I really enjoyed the aspect of Mr. Bones gets hit. You don't necessarily die, but you lose body parts. The more hits you take, the more bones start flying off. And I thought it was really cool how you can reassemble yourself by picking up like arms or legs if they've flown off. Sometimes you get hit so much you're down to like a spinal cord and a head kind of bouncing around the level. Really humorous stuff. I laughed a couple of times as Mr. Bones frantically tried to reassemble himself. To do that, you have to put the bones back together in the right order. Sometimes I had a leg hanging off of my arm where it should be. Sometimes my arm was attached to my leg, and it was just pretty humorous stuff, the way the game mechanic works of getting hit and reassembling. But by the third level, and even the fourth level, I started to notice that Mr. Bones was definitely anything but ordinary. Every single level seemed to be different from the next, and a lot of games are guilty of trying to throw too much at once, not doing one single thing superbly right, but kind of a jumbled mess of parts put together to try to form a good game. Mr. Bones is one of those games that avoids all that. It can throw all these different styles and still do them all well to form a really enjoyable game. One minute I was roaming through the cemetery in a traditional 2D platformer. The next minute I'm running down a hill trying to avoid logs as they're thundering down the hill trying to smash me. The next minute I'm being held up by some skeleton hands flying me through a level. The next minute I'm going underwater through a cave. One level I'm on top of a frozen lake trying to navigate my way through. Just the sheer variety of different ways to play this game is mind-boggling. I haven't seen a game quite like this on the Sega Saturn, or the PlayStation for that matter, or any console at the time that threw so many gameplay styles into one game and have them all be fairly enjoyable. Now the game, as I said before, looks really nice. There's some really nice hand-drawn graphics, some nice CG scrolling backgrounds. The music was composed by Ronnie Montrose, who was a guitar player, was pretty famous from what I understand. The levels are broken up by some mini games, and as you can tell from the cover of the game, which Mr. Bones is holding a guitar, this has got kind of a music theme to it. So one of the in-between levels, you're doing a guitar solo, and there's like a bunch of skeletons out in the audience, and each different button on the controller is like a guitar lick, and there's a background track playing in the back, and as that track plays, you kind of have to put different licks together using the different buttons to keep it all like in time and in rhythm. The better you perform this guitar solo in time with the background music, the more skeletons will like light their lighter like a concert, and you kind of get pumped up because these riffs are all cool that are on each button, and it's cool to put the music all together. One mini game has you playing the drums, kind of like a drum solo. That was a lot of fun. The levels themselves are interspersed with CG cutscenes that tell the story of Mr. Bones trying to take on Dagulian and put an end to his evil skeleton army. I really enjoyed the cutscenes. There's some voice acting that's pretty well done. Mr. Bones is one of those kinds of games where it doesn't really fit into any said category. There's so much variety going on, and it's all done well. It's a very challenging game. I guarantee you're not going to blow through this in one sitting. The game is 2 discs long, so there's quite a bit of levels. After you complete each level, you can return to the options, go to a level select, and replay certain levels. I really enjoyed the game's atmosphere. I thought Mr. Bones was a cool character. I enjoyed the music, all of the levels and mini games. And this is just a prime example of so much creativity being poured into one game from Sega to be released. It didn't click with gamers right away, and it was just faded into obscurity, forgotten, and never to be revisited. Mr. Bones is a great character that Sega could have continued using. I'd love to see a sequel on the Saturn. I'd love to see something on the Dreamcast. Sadly, that's not the way of it. Mr. Bones lives and dies on the Sega Saturn. Overall, it's one of my favorite games on the system. It's a shame it didn't do better with the gamers and critics, because I think it's a very special game on the Sega Saturn, and it does deserve a place in your collection. Three Dirty Dwarfs was released in 1996 for the Sega Saturn, and this game came out of nowhere for me personally. I hadn't read too much on it. There wasn't much advertising for this game, but I picked it up on a blind buy one day at the game store. The back of the box looked really appealing to me. The Sega Saturn had a certain distinct look to its 2D games and artwork. Titles like Astall, Guardian Heroes, which both games I've talked about on this channel quite a bit. Three Dirty Dwarfs retains that hand-drawn, hand-animated look that I've grown so fond of, that I haven't seen duplicated anything else since the Sega Saturn. Sure, there's other 2D games out there, but none of them have quite the art style that the Sega Saturn produced back in the day. Now, Three Dirty Dwarfs isn't very focused on its story. From what I gather from the cinemas and playing the game, these dwarves are looking for missing children, and they are going through different levels trying to find them. Now, where this game shines is that it is an excellent 3-player game. If you have the Sega Saturn multi-tap, plug that in, get a couple controllers, a couple of friends, and you each can take control of one of the dwarves. Now, they are all really cool. It's tough for me to pick a favorite if I had to. One dwarf has a baseball bat. He can throw baseballs up in the air. The longer you hold the button down, the more baseballs he throws up in the air. You must then time it properly, swing your bat, and hit those balls for long-range attacks. One dwarf also has a bowling ball and a bowling pin, and the other dwarf has a shotgun. Now, in addition to like rolling the bowling ball across the street, shooting the shotgun, throwing the baseballs up in the air, hitting them, you also have a secondary attack, which is kind of like a melee. The one dwarf swings the bowling pin, the one hits him with the butt of the shotgun, and one guy obviously can use his bat. Now, this game, where it differs from others, is that one hit, you don't necessarily die. If you're playing with others, or if you're playing by yourself, when you get hit using the dwarf you kind of go into a dizzy mode, and it's up to you to switch control to another dwarf and kind of hit him with your melee weapon to bring him back to life. Now, this creates some very frantic gameplay sessions. The game is best played with 3 players, but it works just fine as a single player. You're able to switch dwarves by hitting the right or left triggers on the controller, and they each have different abilities to suit different situations. There's special moves that you can do by collecting little gems, and these are like team-up moves where all the dwarves kind of morph into one, kind of like a transformer, and form some big monster and use special attacks. But playing with other players is just a lot of fun. The game is, once again, very difficult. The levels themselves look great. Lots of beautiful hand-drawn artwork going on. And like Mr. Bones before it, Three Dirty Dwarfs has quite the change up from level to level. You're always going to be doing something different. The colors are great, the music is great. The voice acting and cinemas in between levels are pretty cool, hand animated. They look really distinct and they tell the story, which isn't the most interesting part of the game. It's definitely at its best when you're controlling the game with your buddies, going through these levels, very difficult. You got to stay on your toes. There's always going to be somebody hitting you. You got to revive your buddy before you all three get hit, because if you all three get hit and you can't revive each other, you're going to have to start the level over. The boss battles are really cool. They're very unique. Kind of a scaling and rotation effect going on where it's on a plane fixed and you can rotate around the object. Really cool scaling effects going on. It looks really impressive. The game is extremely challenging. There's quite a few levels. It's going to last you quite some time. Like Mr. Bones before, also, I haven't played anything quite like Three Dirty Dwarfs with this unique three-player combat. The hand-drawn graphics really work wonders in the presentation. It looks beautiful. The game runs very smooth. If you like beat-em-ups or games like Guardian Heroes, where you're going around and doing combat, you're going to love Three Dirty Dwarfs. And once again, nothing ever came after this game. These characters have been long forgotten. One game released, that's all it took. It didn't sell well like a lot of the original games in the Sega Saturn, but I play this game to this day. It's still fondly remembered by a lot of people out there. Everyone talks highly of this game. It's definitely worth your time if you're looking for a nice action-adventure game on the Sega Saturn. Very fun, very challenging, and very much recommended. Hope you guys have enjoyed taking a look at a couple of my favorite Sega Saturn games. The system never gets enough love, so I'm always happy to spread it when I can. Thanks for watching, guys. Games of War is nothing without you.